Hi, thank you for joining us. So this is Council in the Classroom. We are the Montana World Affairs Council, and we first would like to thank our sponsors. Their sponsors are Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, the Trail West Bank, Stockman Bank, Northwestern Energy, and Neptune Aviation Services. I would like to introduce Ambassador Max Baucus. In 2014, U.S. President Barack Obama nominated Max Baucus to be Ambassador of the United States of America to the People's Republic of China. He served as ambassador from 2014 until 2017. Ambassador Baucus formerly served as the senior United States Senator from Montana. He served in the U.S. Senate from 1978 to 2014 and was Montana's longest-serving U.S. Senator. While in the Senate, Ambassador Baucus was chairman and ranking member of the powerful Senate Committee on Finance. While chairman, he was chief architect of the Affordable Health Care Act. Ambassador Baucus has extensive experience in international trade. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Finance, he led the passage and enactment of the free trade agreements with 11 countries. He also was deeply involved in orchestrating the congressional approval of permanent normal trade relations with China in 2000 and in facilitating China's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Before his election to the U.S. Senate, Ambassador Baucus represented Montana in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1975 to 1978. He earned a bachelor's and law degree from Stanford University, and we are delighted to have him here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Baucus.
Thanks, Mark, very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Now, I'm going to speak for just a few minutes here, not very long. And while I'm speaking, I want you to be thinking those really tough questions you want to ask. Say, don't be bashful, don't be shy. You know, if it's kind of maybe a difficult, embarrassing question, ask it. That means it's probably a pretty good question. I'm serious about that. Let's just be real here. The way to be real is just be honest with each other and just talk about what's on our minds. I'll just start by saying, like all of you, I feel incredibly lucky in two respects. One, to be an American. You know, you don't see a lot of Americans want to live in other countries. People from other countries want to come live in America. And second, as Montanans, and we are so lucky to be Montanans. I think whenever we start discussions like this, it's kind of good to remember just how lucky we are. As Mark said, I served our state for many years in the United States. That loved it. Great job. No better job than representing the people in our state as Montana. In fact, I like to say that I represented. I had about 900,000, about 1 million of the world's best bosses. That's you. I work for you, work for your parents, all your friends and relatives. I'm just the hired hand. I'm just the employee. You guys are my employers. You're my bosses. Well, the next job I had, kind of interesting, I was over at the Cat Grizz football game about 4 years ago. It was, the Grizzlies were playing the Bobcats over in Bozeman. At halftime, I got a telephone call, of all things. It was from President Barack Obama, and I couldn't hear him very well. The cell service wasn't very good in the stadium over there, so I drove out in the countryside a bit. Anyway, he then asked me if I wanted to go to China. Do I want to represent the United States in China? I was sure, great, that's terrific. I love that. So went over there. It's a terrific job. Really liked it so much. A couple of reasons. One, the Chinese people are so energetic. It's amazing. Competitive, pragmatic, practical, like to get things done. They're a pretty positive view on life. And they're almost survivalists. They're so competitive. As you know, in Chinese history, the Great Leap Forward, tens of millions of people died, starvation, the Great Leap Forward. And so there's long memories in China among the Chinese people how tough it is to get food and to survive. And I think that's one reason they're so competitive and work so hard. And the second reason I like the job so much is because I think it's really important for us as Americans to be thinking about what world's going on over there in China. What are they doing? What's their ambition? What's their goal? What do they want to do? The size of the United States is the same size as the size of China. We're about the same in geographic area. But China has 4 times more people than we do in America. And not too distant future, the size of the Chinese economy is going to be bigger than that of the United States. We're number one in the world. We have the biggest economy. China's number two. In about 15, 20 years, China's going to be number one. And the real question is, okay, what's China up to? How are they going to work with us as Americans? And it's a fascinating question, and one I think we as Americans have to spend a lot more time thinking about. One other final point, then we'll open it up for questions. When you go to China, you're just totally struck with the scale. It's how big it is. China produces half of the world's coal. It consumes half of the world's electricity. Produces half the world's aluminum. It has more cell phone users than any other country in the world, by far. By 800 million Chinese use cell phones, if you can think of it. And they're going like gangbusters in China. The railroads, man, they put ours to shame. They're fast, sleek, 200-mile-an-hour railroads. Quiet as a church mouse. And just always on time. They're all over China. Fancy airport terminals, fancy railroad terminals, and they are amazingly efficient. It's really stunning. So it's a great job. I loved it. I encourage a lot of you to think about studying. You don't have to study Chinese language. If you do, that's even better. But just think about China. And if you have a chance, I'll make this one final point too. Try to travel to China just to see it, so to taste it, smell it, get a sense of it. It's one thing to look on the internet and learn about China, but you don't get that much just by reading and reading about China on the internet. Much more of it's by going there. And if you can't go to China, I do encourage something else, and that's just travel. I don't care what your teachers say. I don't care what your parents say. When you graduate from high school, maybe in college, next 4 or 5, 6 years, go overseas, travel, and just get around. I did that, and I'm standing here right now in significant respect because when I was a college student, I went to an overseas campus and then hitchhiked around the world with a knapsack on my back, a handbag, for 1 full year, Europe and Africa and Asia. And boy, I saw a lot. That opened up my eyes to an awful lot that's going on in the world, including China. And I just think while you have the chance, that is the next 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 8 years, do it. Because you won't have a chance after that. You'll be tied down. You got a job, you got kids and married and all those kinds of things. So just, anyway, travel. You just open your eyes. You see a lot. And talk now about China. We talk about North Korea. That's always in the news a bit. So I'm just so happy to be here talking to you guys. It's a lot of fun. Frankly, one of the most rewarding things I've done many years past is to talk to high school kids. I think it's a lot of fun. So I'll stop there.
All right, so we have quite a few classes that are on with us today, and I'd like to start with just a little turn and talk. I'd like you to take this about 15, 20 seconds and turn to your neighbor and talk about the first things that come to mind when you think of both China and North Korea. We're going to take 15 seconds, and then we're going to go around to each school, and I'd like you to choose one representative to go ahead and share some of those thoughts with Ambassador Baucus. And I think that's going to kind of kick off this conversation for us a little bit. So ready? When I say go ahead and turn and talk. Ready, set, go. Also, I know that we have some people on the live stream, and if you have any questions, go ahead.
Well, I might do, yeah. You know, I might do.
Yes.
I might point to somebody. There. Yeah, I see it as a Darby.
Yeah, we've got Darby right in front of us.
Right there.
Yes.
I can see Darby. I can't see the other classes right now. We'll see other classes a little later.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's a lady in the front who's got a blue sweater on, and it stands out quite a bit. Are you in the front row? I'll let you think a little bit. Two behind you is a lady in a pink shirt. And what's on your mind? What do you want to talk about? Anyway, okay,
Yeah.
we got that guy over here. Okay.
Darby, you'll have to remember to unmute your microphone, please. Darby, you're still muted.
Get the teacher up here.
Oh no!
There you go. It worked for a while. For a second.
I know, guys. It's still muted. I think what you have to do is you hit it, you double hit it. I know.
Yeah.
Technology.
Yeah. There you got it.
There it
There you
is.
go. Okay, good.
Welcome.
Okay, go ahead. Again. Okay, all right. What trade restrictions has China put on North Korea for its nuclear program?
Well, essentially, it raises a very, very interesting point. The country that probably has the most influence on North Korea, as your question implies, is China. There's no question. And we Americans, for the last several years, 4 or 5 years, have been, frankly, trying to put a lot of pressure on China to put a lot of pressure on North Korea. And in the meantime, the United States has gone to the United Nations Security Council along with China, where the UN would pass resolutions sanctioning certain economic activity with respect to Korea. China still takes a lot of Korean coal and fish products. A large portion of the money that North Korea uses comes from coal exports. And China likes those coal exports to come into China because China uses that coal to fuel power plants. China is cutting back a little bit. China could cut back more, but coal and some other minerals and fish are the main products that China imports from North Korea. On the other hand, China still does supply about 70-80% of all the oil that goes into North Korea. And China has not cut that off. And China really is at a very tough spot from the Chinese perspective. That is, they don't want to put too much pressure on North Korea, because they put on too much pressure, then maybe all hell breaks loose in the whole Korean peninsula, especially North Korea. That is, Kim Jong-un, the leader, might lose power, and the country becomes destabilized. Refugees might flow over to China, and it just causes a lot of uncertainty. If there's one thing China does not want, that's instability on the Korean peninsula. Chinese are neuralgic. They worship. They're compulsive. They're interested in stability. And so they're going to keep some economic ties with North Korea. We like them to put more pressure on North Korea so Kim Jong-un stops all this nonsense with nuclear missiles, with nuclear bombs, and also with missiles. But it's a big question. Good question.
Wonderful. I'd like to go ahead and let's move to Hamilton. We'll come up the Bitterroot. Hamilton, do you have a question for Ambassador Baucus?
Hey, you can move to the front because I can see it. And just raise your hand. Put a call on.
I don't know if my question's good though.
Oh, it's a good question. It's a great question. Ask it.
Oh God, he can hear me.
You already asked the question. I heard it. Ask the question.
Okay. Here I am. How does China deal with and feel about the political issues going on between North Korea and America?
Well, I'll tell you what China does right now. This is the standard Chinese line. Kim Jong-un, North Korea, China says, that's not too much our problem. That's your problem. United States, that's your problem. So you and North Korea got to figure this out. That's the standard Chinese line. You hear it over and over and over again. I talked many times when I was representing the United States in China as U.S. ambassador, many times to the top China diplomat whose job was North Korea. And I heard that constantly. President Obama would come over, raise the same points, and he'd hear the same thing. They'd say, Mr. President, that's your problem. And when Secretary of State John Kerry came over, same thing, heard it constantly. I think that's a dodge, not just an excuse that China comes up with, because they really don't want to have to deal with the issue very much, because it's so complicated for China. So they want somebody else to do it for them. But in my view, there's no solution to North Korea that does not involve China. Has to involve China, because China is a big boy on the block. They're the big enchilada. They're the 800-pound gorilla. And China's going to be very interested in what the U.S. does or does not do in North Korea. And we Americans should therefore, in trying to find a solution to North Korea, work very much with China in a way that not just put pressure on China on economic matters, but start to talk about the next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years of resolution in North Korea. So it's right now they say it's your problem. That's not really true.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to have Darby mute your microphone, and then Hamilton, if you are there, will you please unmute your microphone? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move over to Bozeman. Bozeman, what questions do you have for Ambassador Baucus?
Yeah, ask anything. Ask about Xi Jinping's dog, you know. Ask about Kim Jong-un. What's he like? I've not met him. I've met the president of China, Xi Jinping, but I've not met Kim Jong-un. Anything.
Yep, Bozeman will pop up. Bozeman, are you there?
Yep. Oh, yeah, we're just, coming up with a question.
All right.
Okay.
1 second.
I'll start pointing. I can see the classroom. I see somebody in glasses, a girl in glasses, front row. Hi. The guy in the white shirt. Can't see what's on your shirt.
Maybe a panda bear.
Panda bear. Hey, Mr. Panda, you have a question?
Our question is, if we go to war with North Korea, will China still want to trade with us?
Well, we're not going to go to war with North Korea. That would be a disaster. Millions of people would die. I don't think it's going to happen. It's a lot of bluster right now. President Trump calls Kim Jong-un that little rocket man. That's unwise. It's a lot of bluster. And when he called Trump what, a dotard or something, I had to look it up in the dictionary. It's in this war of words, that's what it is. It's a war of words. I don't think it's going to happen. China is just very concerned about the peninsula, the Korean peninsula. They want to keep stability there, and whatever the result is, they'd prefer that China, be in control. They are very much worried that whatever happens in the peninsula, that America might be too much in control with South Korea. They don't want that. And that's one reason they're biding their time, the Chinese are, to trying to figure it out, how they can make sure that things work out in a way that they, the Chinese, like. If there's a war in North Korea, U.S., it's not going to happen. But if there were a war, China would not stand idly by. China would move in to North Korea and try to take control as much as it possibly could. Don't forget, they're right there. They're on the North Korean border. They got hundreds of thousands of troops there. So they're in a pretty strong position if that were to happen. The main goal here is for that not to happen. The main goal here is to dig down deep, understand China better, talk to China more responsibly without tweets and Twitter and name calling, and privately. That's what good diplomacy is all about with Japan and South Korea, and trying to find the best solution possible that way.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Freud next with a question, but we'll do one more in Bozeman, and then we'll come back to Freud. But
Can I stop Bozeman?
yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's kind of interesting. In Bozeman, New York, until recently, our American ambassador to Russia is from Bozeman. It's Mike McFall, and he went to school at Bozeman High, and when he was there at Bozeman, he was told he has to take an English course. He asked, "What's the easiest English course?" And the answer he was given is debate. So he took debate, and the debate subject had to do with Russia, and so that's why he later became U.S. ambassador to Russia from Bozeman. Good guy.
We have one more question.
So I'm just curious, what does North Korea supply for the world? Like, what technically, if I guess we went into a world war, what would North Korea, like, if we ended up bombing them, what would they Okay, let me rephrase that. If we wiped North Korea off the planet, we'll just put it that way. And what do they supply for the world? Like, if they weren't here, what would we be missing?
Well, first of all, we're not going to be able to bomb them off the world. Because if military battle heats up, if we try to preemptively try to knock out some North Korean missile sites or nuclear capability, Kim Jong-un would, I'm sure, declare war, all-out war on South Korea and who knows where. It'd just be utter devastation. It'd be just awful. But to get into your point, North Korea does not provide a lot of goods, not a lot of minerals, not a lot of products to the world. They're kind of a hermit. They have a hard time getting along, frankly, because they've insulated themselves so much from the world. They don't trade very much with anybody. And they engage in a lot of nefarious activities around the world to get cash back into the country to finance their missile program and to finance their nuclear program. So nothing to be lost. The trouble, Kim has been very, very clever. What has he done? He's built this terrific missile and nuclear capability so he gets attention, raises his profile, so people around the world pay attention to him. He is not going to do what Gaddafi did in Libya. Gaddafi did a deal with the United States where Gaddafi would back off with his nuclear program so that Gaddafi and Libya could start economic trade with the United States. Well, it didn't work out that well for him. And Kim's going to make sure that he stays atop of his missile and nuclear program, and to the point where he clearly becomes a nuclear power, and only then, in my judgment, will he start to talk in a reasonable way with other countries, also other nuclear powers. Remember, Pakistan's a nuclear power. So is India, China, Israel, U.S., Russia, and we talk to each other. And I think we're going to get to the point where Kim becomes a nuclear power. Then we're going to have to talk with him. We're going to have to encourage him to be civil and want to deal in the world and join what's called the Non-Proliferation Treaty, lots of nuclear treaties, and with the assurance that he's not going to be toppled. He's going to want the assurance that we're not going to try to go in and assassinate him. The fancy term is regime change. If he's assured there's no regime change, then he might want to start talking. To me, that's the most rational outcome for all this.
Wonderful. Freud, are you ready with your question?
Yes, we are.
Hi
Can you
there.
hear us?
We
Yeah,
can
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, when you went to China, what was your favorite thing?
Oh gosh, it just the challenge, the necessary challenge of working it out, U.S. and China. There's a very interesting book by Henry Kissinger. It's called On China, written about 5-6 years ago. And he in that book talks about something called the Thucydides trap. A Greek historian, Thucydides, wrote about rising powers meeting established powers. And I think it's very relevant today. The United States is the established power in the world, China the rising power. And not too many years from now, China is going to be a country not only whose population is much larger than the U.S., but whose economy is larger than the U.S. And they're starting to feel their oats. They're starting to get a little bounce in their step. And they're starting to feel pretty confident about themselves in the future with a very different culture and different form of government. So what struck me the most over there, what I liked the most over there was just grappling with that challenge, because I think it's critical in dealing with, for Americans to become much more aware of, so that we can, our kids and our grandkids are better assured of a better life and a higher standard of living than otherwise would be the case. And also, second is the Chinese people. They're so upbeat, basically, they're competitive. It's infectious. I think the Chinese people have a more positive outlook on their future than we Americans do on ours. Is because they've come so far. And there's such a history, thousands of years, as a pride in China. And it's wonderful to watch. You have to accept it. That's what it is. And we Americans have to just, okay, that's China, we're America, and let's figure out how we work with each other, because that's going to be one of the biggest questions we're going to face, that you're going to face as high school students next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
That's wonderful. Freud, do you have any other questions for Ambassador Baucus?
See, China takes a little bit of American agriculture products. They take some of our wheat. We're trying to get China to take American beef. I worked on that constantly when I was over there. And China just did announce, okay, they're going to start taking some American beef. But they take Australian beef and European beef, but I think they're now going to start taking American beef. And that'll be good, too. That'll help our livestock operators.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Hamilton. Hamilton, I'd like you to get prepared, but before we go to Hamilton, I have one from the live stream from a school that's watching on the live stream, and they're curious about some of the environmental impacts with China, and they had heard that recently China has started to maybe crack down on some of the factories,
right,
and they're wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah. No, it's really true. There are huge environmental problems in China. Beginning about 20, 30 years ago, one of their president back then was a guy named Deng Xiaoping. And for Deng Xiaoping, hey, let's open up. Let's be competitive. Let every man be a millionaire. I mean, it was very market driven and with virtually no controls. And sure, there are a lot of millionaires. In fact, there's over 600 billionaires in China today. So all these plants were built and export a lot of products, paid virtually no attention to the air, virtually no attention to the water, groundwater, or surface water. It's a mess. China, of late, has started to focus on pollution, because they have to. It's so bad at times, air and water. And they're doing it because the people are asking for it. If you're really interested in air pollution in China, there's a fascinating documentary. You can find it. I think it's YouTube. It's called Under the Dome. Under the Dome. One of the best documentaries I've ever seen, better produced than any other. It's like Steve Jobs, only better. It's really good. Documenting the terrible air pollution that's in China. Well, now, with President Xi Jinping, his main goal is to keep control. The Communist Party wants to maintain control. Party involvement is so important, and control is everything. They're starting to control more and more and more and more in Chinese society. And one of the ways to keep people happy is to start cleaning up the air, clean up the water. He's kept people happy by making sure they get jobs. But now the Chinese people have more income. They started thinking about, hey, let's do something about all this air pollution, this water pollution. And so it's happening. And it's going to be very interesting to see how far they go. I think they'll do pretty well in cleaning up air and water. Why? Because when they set their mind on something, the Chinese government, they get it done. They just get it done. It's a very efficient country that way. In fact, they think this. They think their form of government, that's called socialism with Chinese characteristics, is far superior to our Western democracy. You talk to government officials over there, and they say, hey, look how far we've come in China. We've grown so much. It never would have happened if we were a democracy. It never would have happened. You know what? They're probably right. It wouldn't have happened. And they think they're the model for developing countries. Socialism, where one party control and just dictate what is not going to happen. And I remember talking to Xi Jinping once. He said the sole role of the party is to take care of the people. Take care of the people. It trumps human rights. It trumps civil liberties. It's to take care of the people, and by that he meant economically, and I think now he means environmentally. Healthcare, too, is starting to be addressed much more, but they are starting to focus a lot more on the environment, as they have to.
Wonderful. Hamilton, are you ready? Go ahead and unmute your microphone. Mrs. Mason's class, are you down? Are you there? Mrs. Mason's class, if you're having trouble with your sound, you can also type go to the website and join the link and go ahead and type in. Well, they can go to the link, the stream, and type in. Let's go ahead and move back to Darby. Darby, you had some phenomenal questions earlier.
Okay. I heard you were a runner, and
Sorry?
I heard that you were a runner, and I was wondering how your recovery was after hitting your head in a 50-mile marathon held in Washington, D.C.
Sorry, I didn't hear it all. Could you ask the question one more time, please?
Okay. Okay. I heard you were a runner, and I was wondering how was your recovery after hitting your head in a 50-mile marathon held in Washington, D.C.?
Well, yeah, it's true. There's something called the JFK 50. I ran that one year, and about 12 miles into it, a real rocky trail, and fell down, hit my head pretty hard, blood everywhere. But I kept running, finished it, and about 2 days later, my son would say, "Dad, why are you always dragging your left leg?" And then he'd say, "Why are you walking around like an old man?" And I'd give a talk out in Arizona, get off the plane, and a lady working for me said, "I'm taking you to the hospital. You just can't function." And I said, no, I can talk. Let me give my little speech, and then we'll go to the hospital. I went to the restroom to change into speaking clothes. I couldn't tie my tie. I couldn't button my shirt. I couldn't do anything. Okay, let's go to the hospital. Long and the short of it is, I had what's called a subdural hematoma. That's a big word for not much. Basically, because I was hit hard, fluid would start building up inside my head next to the brain. It pushed my brain way off the side, so I had 2/3 normal brain. And people knew I didn't have much of a brain anyway. And then they put 2 holes in my head and drained it. I always knew I had holes in my head too. But anyway, fine after that.
You know, I think we had a problem with Hamilton. Hamilton, I apologize. I think we had you muted. So let's try one more time because I do want to get to you guys. So Hamilton.
Can you hear us?
We can hear you. We're so sorry.
You can hear us. That's amazing. That's awesome. So, all right. So our question is, what do people in China think about people in the U.S.?
Good question. Excellent question. You know, they like Americans. The people in China like America. They like Americans. Why? Well, clothes, jeans and movies, rock stars. They like America. They like the openness, the sense of freedom in America. They like it a lot. And it's the first thing that strikes them when they visit the United States. 300,000, back up. We Americans issue 3 million visas a year to Chinese who come over to America. 3 million. 300,000 student visas. 300,000 Chinese students each year come to America. I wish more Americans would go to China. But they love America. It's Yellowstone Park. It's the national parks. It's Las Vegas to some degree. They just like coming to America. It's look at all the people in China. It's 4 times the population of the U.S. Country the same size as the U.S. So they come to America. Hey, it's open spaces and freedom of mountains. They love it. They love it over here. They like Americans. It's just the government is really pushing hard to get more control over the Chinese people, pushing back on internet so there's Chinese people have less internet availability, and it's kind of closing off China a little bit that way. More, so that's they got to face that, but they like America a lot.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Are we good? We gotta go.
Hamilton, do you have any other questions?
I do not, but the bell just rang, so we gotta go.
Okay.
Okay.
So bye.
We'll see you. I'm so glad we caught you before the
Good
bell.
luck, guys. Just go for it. Good luck. See ya.
Okay, now we're going to go ahead and move back down to Darby. Darby, I'm sorry to cut you off earlier.
I have a question that's with your previous outdoor activity. Not too many of the kids know that you're really comfortable in the mountains and hiking. In fact, I met you once on the Dawson-Pitamakan Loop Trail, and we had a short conversation. And I spent some time this summer at Sperry and the Grand Park Chalets. I was wondering in your retirement if you're going to get involved in rebuilding or restructuring any of those national parks? I think the kids here are really interested in your view on what's going on outdoors with respect to the fires and everything, and kind of what you're going to do in your retirement too.
Well,
That's an interesting-
it's true I'm no longer in public service. I'm not representing our state in the Senate and not representing our country in China. But I'm not retired in the private sector. Frankly, I'm working, helping to advise a couple of companies, a couple of Chinese companies, a couple of American companies. I'm trying to do what I can in that capacity to help the U.S.-China relationship. I'm also setting up in Missoula a public policy institute, encouraging high school age students primarily to go into public service, setting up fellowships and scholarships and so forth. With respect to the outdoors, it's just doing what I can just to help maintain our open spaces and our public access to streams and lakes, etc. In the 36 years I was in the Senate, I'm probably most proud, frankly, of all the efforts I and my office undertook to help Montana outdoors. Beginning up north with the North Fork and the Flathead, protecting that, the lake, Eastern Front, the Legacy Project, that's 300,000 acres of protected land over by Sealy Swan, Blackfoot River efforts, and then down further into closer to Bozeman. I will always stay involved because we Montanans, more than people in any other state, are outdoors people. We love the outdoors more than any other people in any other state. And it's what we like so much. And that's why I moved back to Montana. A lot of former ambassadors and senators, they don't go back to their home states. They stay in Washington or do something else. No, we're here. My wife, we love Montana so much. We are here. And we just feel so fortunate. So I'll be working on it, just like all of you. Because it's our state. It's our heritage. It's our legacy. It's who we are.
Thank you. I want to go back over to Bozeman. Bozeman has several classes that are all together in one room.
Okay.
And so I suspect that they probably have some more questions for you.
Okay. Hi. My question is how much debt is America in with China, and what does that mean for the American economy?
This question comes up a lot. It's a good question. China has pursued an export policy. By that I mean they made a lot of stuff, a lot of products, TV sets, cars, cell phones, you name it, and export them overseas, a lot to America. And Chinese have built up these big, large amount of foreign exchange reserves. It's getting close to $4 trillion. It's a lot of money. And they hold lots of other countries' currencies in that foreign exchange reserve. Now, technically, I've forgotten the exact percent, but the percent of U.S. treasuries that China holds is pretty low. It's less than people think. It is true, however, that China has holdings in, student loan debt, mortgage loan debt, and other forms of securities. But China never uses that leverage. During the time I was there, I never heard one word about, you better watch out. We'll start selling that stuff. The reason is because if they start selling it, it hurts China. With all the talk about tension between the U.S. and China, we are really closely bound in many, many deep, profound ways. One is trade. We trade so much back and forth, U.S.-China. We depend upon each other so much, U.S. and China. UN, for example, we are in the same boat with respect to North Korea. Both of us, U.S., China, are very worried about that guy Kim Jong-un up there over in North Korea. So we're really close together, and so the main interest in China building up its foreign exchange reserves, close to $4 trillion, is they're using that to build lots of stuff in China. There's this big project that's called One Belt, One Road. It's massive. They're building roads and bridges and ports across China and over into East Asia and around India and the Gulf Coast and so forth. That's the real concern, is all the power that China has with all the money they have, not that they're going to cause havoc because they own a good bit of U.S. debt.
Thank you. Bozeman, do you have another question for Ambassador Baucus?
All right. Regarding demographics in China, what is the disparity between the rural and urban areas and the wealthy and the poor, and how do you expect that will change with the pace at which China is becoming a greater world power?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. Generally, Eastern China, that is the coastal provinces, are much more wealthy than are the Western provinces way out in the western part of the country. The income gap, that is the disparity between the most wealthy in China and the least wealthy, is as great, if not greater, than the income gap in the United States between our most wealthy and our less fortunate. It's a problem that China is starting to address. In fact, it's really interesting. Just a day or two ago, at the 19th Party Congress over there, Xi Jinping and the top government officials indicated that one of the big they call the word contradictions in China is just that point between the wealthy and the less wealthy. I've heard President Xi say many times by the year about 2020 or 25 or 2030, they will have erased poverty in China. And I think they mean it. That's not just a throwaway line. So we'll see what happens. And that's really an excellent question. It's a big problem they're going to have, how to reduce that gap between the wealthy and the less wealthy. But, go way out to Western China, the big province out there is called Xinjiang. It's 3 or 4 times the size of California. It's massive. Reminds me a little bit of Montana. Mountains, snow-capped peaks, lots of dry land. It's rivers, but not a lot of people. And but they're trying to address that income gap. Only now they start to really begin to focus on it. And we'll see. I don't know. We'll find out.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question. Freud, I don't want to forget about you, and I want to come back to you guys. Do you have another question for Ambassador Baucus? It looks like Bozeman has to go as well.
Okay. See you guys.
Thank you, Bozeman.
He's going for it, guys. Give him hell. That's a lot of questions.
Let's see. Freud, are you still there with us?
Yep, we're still here. How would you compare your time as senator to one as an ambassador?
What?
How would you compare your time as a senator to your time as an ambassador?
Well, they're very different in some respects, but not in another. The similarity is still a hired hand. When you're a senator, you're working for the people of Montana. And I love that. When you're an ambassador, you're working for the people of the United States. And I love that too. The main difference is, in a certain sense, the Chinese job was a little more challenging because we Americans have about 2,300 people working for us in the U.S. Embassy in China. So I had to get handle over all that. That was a big challenge because not only is the State Department in the U.S. Embassy, but almost every other U.S. department and agency is in the U.S. Embassy. Say, Department of Energy has people working there. FBI, Department of Defense, Health and Education Welfare, you name it, they're there. And so I had to help. One of my main jobs is to coordinate all that. In addition to that, I had to learn a lot about China very quickly. I'd been in China many times, maybe 8, 9, 10 times up to that point. I had to learn so much. The steep learning curve. It was just, so much to learn. And and frankly, I decided not to run again for the Senate about 4 years ago because I've already done that. I love the job. It's getting a little automatic. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to do something, jump in the world, do something new and different, sink or swim. And so I announced I'm not going to run again. Then 2 months later, I got this call from President Obama asking me if I want to do this. And I jumped at the chance. And I like working on the relationship U.S.-China. It's a big geopolitical question, and I like that kind of stuff. It's just fascinating. And I did my best to earn the trust of Chinese people, Chinese government. And how would I do that if I did? I would do it by just being candid, being honest, asking them honest questions, not just sitting there and listening to them, but and ask kind of challenging questions like, okay, China, what's your intention here? you're growing so much, pretty soon you're going to be an economy bigger than ours. What are we to think? Look what you've done in the South China Sea, all those islands you built up down there. That's not good. You did that against international law. So what are we to think? So I felt one of my best uses of myself was to ask these questions, and not in a negative way, not in a personal way, but in a constructive, positive way, because they're honest questions. And I urge everybody who came over, U.S. government officials, U.S. private enterprise folks, same thing. Be candid, get engaged, ask questions, because this relationship is so important. So that's the difference between my Senate job, and the China job.
Ambassador Baucus, we are almost out of time, and I want to first thank the students. I've had a lot of people on the live stream that have commented and said what thoughtful and what insightful questions the students of Montana are asking today. And then I've also had quite a few people say thank you. Thank you so much for coming into the studio today. And thank you, Montana.
You guys got
really
the whole world ahead of you. So I'm just saying, go for it.
I like it. Go for it.
Yeah, just trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Okay.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.